way that this is piled on makes it feel as if there was an ulterior motivation to all of this. This much time has passed, and it's gotten this much attention, and we still don't have any evidence or additional information?
He knew what he was inviting her back to the hotel room for.
We don't know that's the case. We don't know if that's the case. That is completely bad faith. That is incredibly bad faith. Okay, see, the double standards again. The double standards. This person does not even recognize their own double standards. They are accepting this story at face value with no pushback, no criticism, no further digging, no compilation of evidence. No evidence was shown at all. There's something really important about these allegations that I need to address really quick. There's something incredibly important about these allegations that absolutely needs to be addressed off the bat. The way that these allegations are framed, the way that they're phrased, with all of these loaded words, these leading statements, a lot of people have come to the conclusion or are speculating that these allegations are more than likely fake. They're more than likely fabricated. This victim might not even be a real victim, which is something that I had assumed too, because of like how obscure some of the wording here is, but I don't think that is the case at all. I don't think that's the case at all. I don't think that these allegations are coming from nowhere as a fabrication. Not anymore, right? Obviously, I'm not going to say that on a video. I'm not going to announce that on a video because I don't want to spread misinformation. But again, I feel like there is a lot to digest here in terms of what's being said in these allegations. So we're going to do a quick read through. I'm going to tell you guys what I think. So this individual, who is completely anonymous, by the way, we know nothing of them, produced a testimony stating, "I became a fan of SaberSpark when I was in high school, when I found his essay video titled Ballad of the Brony back in 2011. Now, what is interesting about this is that Ballad of the Brony just so happens to be SaberSpark's first ever video. If you go to his Wikitubia, if you go to all of the sources that document SaberSpark, all of them say the same thing. Ballad of the Brony just so happens to be his first ever upload, which is apparently made as like a college project. I'm not entirely sure. Like if we look into his Wikitubia, that's what it states. Let me continue reading this. After graduating and turning 18, I added him on Skype to tell him I was a big fan of his, which is kind of interesting to say because how could you be a big fan of somebody who was apparently bringing their legs into the YouTube scene and barely becoming a noteworthy YouTuber, if you could even call him a noteworthy YouTuber back in 2011, 2012. A lot of YouTubers weren't really widely respected or recognized the same way that YouTubers are respected and revered today, right? People like YouTubers back then just had a different standard. They were just looked at differently. So it's very strange that this person is claiming to be a big fan of his. He had me back almost instantly. We had a conversation ending with him giving me his phone number, which was a really big deal to me at the time, since this was the first time interacting with any sort of celebrity, which you could hardly call him a celebrity. You could hardly call him a celebrity at the time, right? He was pretty much a nobody in a very niche community at that, right? A very, very niche community. So again, call him a celebrity is an extreme overstatement. I had developed a parasocial crush on him due to being starstruck, which was something that he was aware of. We would talk on Skype and text each other semi-frequently leading up to the first time meeting him. Now, something that I want to point out here is the leading statement saying that this was something in regards to her being starstruck that he was aware of. How do we know that? Who knows? We're just supposed to believe this person at face value, right? Which is just not something that you should be doing at all when it comes to allegations or situations like these or any drama revolving some sort of allegation. In 2012, I went to my first pony convention. This was my first time ever traveling by myself and was soon after the two of us became friends. All right? When I met up with him in person, he invited me to his hotel room and he showed me the video he was editing on his laptop. Very interesting detail, right? I don't see why that's relevant, causing me to internally geek out. Maybe they're trying to insinuate that they now had this sort of dynamic over them where this person was, impressionable, right? Which made her very susceptible to certain things. See, it's very leading. It is very leading, right? It's leading you to a conclusion all the way through it, which I find incredibly skewed, incredibly jarring. I was really nervous being alone in a hotel room with someone I was a huge fan of, which again, I don't really know how you can be a huge fan of somebody who was hardly relevant at the time and had a crush on, but I tried to play it cool. He was 4 to 5 years older than me. By the way, this person was 18 at the time. SaberSpark would have been 22 to 23 years older. 22 to 23 years old at the time, which is completely negligent. These are two college-aged individuals. So again, another leading implication. Doesn't mean anything. Making me feel more nervous, out of place. See, look at all of these loaded phrases and leading statements. He would bring up the prospects of the two of us dating and how it didn't feel right for us to do so. But why wouldn't it feel right for these people to date? Why wouldn't it feel right for these people to date? It doesn't make any sense. It doesn't make any sense. Everything here is just incredibly leading, and it's just difficult to palette in a way where you can take this as something incredibly impactful, if that makes any sense. Anyways, I'm going to take a little break here before moving on to read chat. Believe all victims. All right, pal. All right, pal. Good joke. Depends on what grade she was in. High school, if she found a div in freshman or sophomore, that's 2 to 3 years of fanhood. The other statements could make more sense then. I don't think that's possible. I don't even think that's possible because the video was posted in let's see. The video was posted in 2011. So she would have been between the ages of 17 and 18 around this time. Yeah. Look, December 7th, 2011. And then she turned 18, graduated? Or she graduated and then turned 18? Or was she already 18 and then graduated? I just don't, like, what's the timeline? When's her birthday? Because I would assume that a lot of people aren't really turning 18 post-graduation or close to their graduation, right? And all my time talking to people in high school, right? Funnily enough, I don't think I've met a lot of people that were like, you know, younger than 18 when they graduated. I don't think I've met anybody younger than 18 that graduated. So this is like a very interesting sort of timeline, right? But that's besides the point. I'm not going to speculate on that too much. After that, he almost immediately initiated making out with me and guided me to his bed. In this moment, he did not directly ask me for consent. I was thrown onto his bed, and he would insert himself into me. SaberSpark was also significantly larger than me, as I was an 80-something pound, 18-year-old girl, so I physically could not stop him. Okay, look. I understand that this part right here is going to be difficult to read for a lot of people. It's going to be difficult to interpret, and it might even be difficult to combat, but there is something here to like dig into and sort of, you know, talk about, right? What seems to me here is that they probably interacted in a way where these individuals were attracted to each other, right? If this is true, SaberSpark probably made a move, and because she failed to communicate her intentions and what she did and didn't want, one thing led to another, but I highly doubt that it was just immediately initiated making out with me, guided me to his bed, and then did not directly ask for consent. I was thrown onto his bed and he would insert himself into me. There has to be a lot more escalation in a situation like this before it gets to this point. You can't just expect me to believe that SaberSpark just like grabbed this girl, threw her onto the bed, and just immediately just went to town, right? No sexual interaction goes like that unless it is definitive rape, right? No sexual interaction goes to that like that unless that is the expectation set beforehand, or unless it is like some form of definitive rape, which I don't think is the case here. I think that these people just probably failed to communicate in an effective way. So to call this rape without more detail is incredibly dangerous. It is incredibly dangerous to just immediately assume that SaberSpark is a rapist off of this. SaberSpark was also significantly larger than me, as I was an 80-something pound, 18-year-old girl. Again, very, very loaded phrase. Very loaded phrase to make you think about the situation in the worst way possible, when there are probably significantly more details here that are being left out. I felt extremely nervous and uncomfortable because I had never experienced having any sort of sexual intimacy with someone I was not dating before, much less someone I just met. I was very new to meeting people online in general. I feel like this is just a normal reaction for people to have after hooking up with somebody that they barely know, right? I guarantee you that a lot of us who have probably hooked up with somebody that we barely knew, right, probably felt really weird about it afterwards. I feel like this is just a normal experience to have. I feel like this is just a normal reaction to have in a situation where you're hooking up with someone that you barely know, or that you've met only recently, or that you've only known for maybe like a handful of months to a year. Because it appears to me that these individuals only knew each other for a handful of months. Because keep in mind, if this person watched this person's YouTube video, it probably would have been maybe a couple of weeks after, maybe a couple of months after it got a lot of traction, right? And then she reached out to him on Skype and then became a fan after the fact. Or maybe she became a fan in 2012. Who knows? Who knows like how this timeline is going, right? Who knows how long these people actually knew each other for? It's very difficult. It's very difficult. So depending on how little they actually knew each other and how this interaction took place, this is a very common sentiment to have, that this person, or at least in this testimony, is being phrased in a way that leads you to assume the worst possible circumstances, the worst possible implications on SaberSpark, right? When you can interpret this in so many different ways. There are time gaps in her stories. Given the rest of the text, it's not clear to me that those sentences actually follow immediately. True. She was small. If she was only 80 pounds. One, if this is the type of risk you use. Pacing issues are rampant throughout the text. Either these gaps are deliberate, she's a sped, or it's false. And this is a result of the tendency to focus on weird details when lying. That's true. That's true. I agree. Which is why I'm very, 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 like, what's the word that I'm looking for here? I'm very skeptical. That's why I'm very skeptical of these allegations, right? I'm not going to dismiss them outright because there is a possibility that these allegations might have some credence, might have some truth to it, are probably based in reality, but it is incredibly difficult to, like, sort of really take them at face value. It is incredibly difficult to just believe them the way that they're laid out, right? How many situations have we seen like this in the past in regards to people like Quiet, in regards to people like, in regards to people like Quiet, in regards to people like Alex Kister, in regards to people like Mewtwo King, where somebody came up with a somewhat believable story that got passed along to somebody and then got exploded, and the person's like whole reputation came crashing down off of something that had no basis, right? It's just too similar. It's just too similar, and I can't shake that like foul play out of my head. For those of you that understand. I'll believe it when some semblance of proof is shown. I agree. I maintained the friendship until a second occurrence happened at a completely different PonyCon in 2013. This time, we met in a public space but had no one around and talked for a while. He kept bringing up the prospects of us starting a relationship and how it felt wrong. He would grab my hand saying how it felt so right, only to push my hand away saying, but so wrong. Again, I don't understand why this is being brought up. Maybe the person was being dramatic. Maybe SaberSpark was just like joking around. Maybe they were just like not actually interested in a committed relationship, right? There could be so many different ways that you can interpret this, but people are going to go to the worst possible conclusion when it comes to something that is phrased in this way, with all of the leading details that make the following information look a lot more egregious. I had decided that my crush on him was something I needed to get over because I felt my emotions were being toyed with. He then suggested going to a more public space around others, and we went into an elevator to go to the lobby of the PonyCon hotel. As soon as the door closed, SaberSpark forcefully shoved me against the wall and shoved his tongue down my throat. It scared me and actually hurt, triggering another attack of dissociation. Again, triggering another attack of dissociation. Purposefully use language here to make this appear in the worst way possible. I actually don't even know if it's deliberate. I don't know if this person is deliberately framing this in the worst way possible to make these allegations hit a lot harder to people that are more naive and susceptible to stuff like this. And again, we don't have any additional details here. We don't know if there was like a lead. We don't know if there was like an escalation where maybe she was reciprocating some sort of flirting. Maybe there was some touching. Who knows, right? We don't know. We don't know whether there was any sort of implied consent. We don't know any additional details here. But if we were to fill in the blanks, it is more likely that there were some sort of interactions, right? If we were to just assume and like theory craft, it is probably fair to say that there were some interactions that led to an escalation like this that was probably poorly communicated, instead of him just being an outright, like, you know, rapist, instead of him being an outright sexual abuser or sexual assaulter, right? Who knows, though? Once again, you do not ask for consent when throwing me into this situation. And something that needs to be brought up here is that a lot of people will typically say that consent always needs to be verbalized, that consent always needs to be stated. In most social situations, if you're somebody that has ever been outside or has ever touched grass or has been to a bar or has ever hooked up with anybody ever, right? Implied consent is a very real thing. Typically, there are invitations and body language that leads to interactions like these, right? So who knows if there was some miscommunication here? Who knows if there was some misinterpretations here, right? It's very difficult to say. It's very difficult to say. But consent isn't always delivered verbally. It isn't always delivered verbally. That's not to say that it's a good thing that consent isn't always delivered verbally, but that's just not how sociable people interact. That's not how sociable people engage in sexual interactions. Once the doors open and people were present, it's led me to feel very embarrassed. Again, more leading statements. He got off me and took my hand and guided me, or not leading statements. Once again, more loaded statements. He got off me and took my hand and guided me towards the stairs to go back down to where we just were and into a men's restroom where he pulled his pants down and guided my hands and had to perform oral sex on him. Again, what are the details leading up to this? What's the context? What's the extra information that we're missing here? We don't have any implications of body language. We don't have any details that, again, may have led to this escalation. We just have nothing. I was afraid of denying him because of past experiences with sexual assault, so I did it to get over with without wanting to cause a problem. I mean, this I can't really poke too much at because I've heard countless stories, especially covering drama on YouTube, where people typically do freeze up in a fight or flight sort of instinct, right? They just freeze and they just let stuff happen, right? Typically, a lot of situations with sexual abuse do happen in this fashion. I can't really comment against this, right? This is probably the only thing that is somewhat reasonable in this, that can be somewhat believed at face value. I would say that you could rationalize in some way is probably more accurate to say. This is the only thing here that you could probably rationalize accurately or fairly, where he would ejaculate on my face, apologize profusely, and then offer the same handshake as he did at the con initially met him saying friends. Which again, this makes it feel as if this entire story was fake, right? The repetition of this makes it feel as if this entire story is fake. But again, we don't know if this individual is using humor to lighten the mood. We don't know if this person was having some post-nut clarity and then realized, oh, did I just do something bad by ejaculating on this person's face? We don't know anything. And for all we know, this entire situation right here, this entire gesture could be just him trying to break the ice and trying to ground the situation in the best way he knows how. I'm not saying that is a definite fact. I'm just saying that it's a possibility. These claims are not clear, and how is this rape? Again, you could only classify this as rape if you were to interpret this in the worst faith possible. In the most bad faith way possible, could you only consider this rape in. Despite pretending I was fine, I had slowly begun pulling away from SaberSpark. I cried that night while staying with a friend, but waited for the friend to fall asleep so no one could hear me, and I would cry for months, feeling ashamed of myself for putting myself in a compromised situation with someone I hardly knew. I actually don't really know how to take this, because a lot of people will typically regret their sexual interactions after the fact with somebody that they barely know, because they'll be like, man, I should have saved this for a person that I was more in love with somebody that I respected more, with somebody that I liked more, because a lot of people typically view sex as being something incredibly sacred, when realistically, I'm sorry for my controversial take that I'm about to have, sex is not actually a very sacred thing, if we're going to be real here, right? People have sex all the fucking time. Every fucking living creature has sex all the time. But the only reason that we believe sex is a sacred thing, and I fall victim to this too, I do believe sex is a sacred thing, at least personally. The reason why we believe sex is a sacred thing is due to cultural values and social values, to be clear, right? So I definitely understand why this person would feel this way after having sexual interactions that she wasn't fully prepared for. If any of this story is true, there are things that you could criticize SaberSpark for being a little bit too pushy, for being uncommunicative, and for not trying to understand this partner that well. But I wouldn't call it rape. Rape is too hard of an implication. Rape is too hard of an implication to paint against somebody. Sex should be sacred, but you can make it something that isn't to yourself if you want to. I agree. Depends, but again, it depends again on how you came up, how you view sex. I had always felt taken advantage of by him and tried being friendly and pretending nothing was wrong because it was all I knew how to do. I would blame myself for the interactions for years, only opening up to a few close people, questioning if consent was implied because of my crush, and unwillingness and fear to outright try to stop the advance because of how uncomfortable I felt. This part right here is incredibly important to look at least in my opinion, because They are questioning the idea of implied consent. This is a very leading statement. This is a very leading statement, a very loaded statement that also leads the reader to believe that perhaps this person was never actually reciprocating, that this person was never actually escalating the situation, that this person may have not actually interacted with this person in kind, right? Which is just another form of saying reciprocation. Like when you look at this, when you look at this line and reflect it on everything else or superimpose it on everything else, it paints the entire story in a much more daunting light. It makes it feel a lot more negative than what it is, because now we have to question whether this person was just, being taken advantage of, whether this person like froze like a deer in the headlights each and every time and was just used as a fuck doll, right? For lack of better words. But I do not like how this is phrased, because we do not know. And according to this, it doesn't even seem like this person fully understands what exactly they're alleging here. It doesn't seem like this person fully understands if they feel violated, if they feel like they were raped, or if they gave implied consent, or if there was any sort of moving pieces here, any moving behaviors that led up to these situations occurring, right? It appears that this person doesn't even know themselves based on this. But again, that is purely a conjecture. My interpretation. Feel free to disagree. I understand that there is a possibility that he felt consent was implied because he knew I had a crush on him. However, he not once asked me for consent directly and was instead thrown into these sexual encounters again. Usually very suddenly. Again, usually very suddenly. We need further elaboration on and details in situations like these. We need to know how you reciprocated, if you did it all. We need to know what your behaviors were. We need to know what you did before we can even begin dissecting this or even taking this at face value. There is a possibility that he felt consent was implied. This statement also implies that there is a possibility that this person may have reciprocated, right? Because now they're saying they have a crush. So how were your interactions? Was there any sexting involved? Was there any flirting? Was there any dirty talk? Was there any touching? Was there any physical flirting, to say the least, right? Who knows? There were no discussions about the power dynamic between us, which is unnecessary to point out, because you could hardly call this a power dynamic. This is such a useless point that people will use to try to make a situation look significantly more coercive than what it actually was, right? Completely useless point. There is no way that you could call this a power dynamic, right? Somebody being attracted to you because of the things that you do is not a power dynamic. That is not a power dynamic. That is just how relationships work, right? At this point, what about relationships where there's an individual where there's a middle class individual who's dating a very poor woman, or vice versa, right? It's completely pointless to this entire point is not a point. It is pointless. And my parasocial connection to him, and not wanting someone I was a fan of to hate me if I rejected him, leaving me afraid to stop his advances. So, to me, what this reads as is literally her saying that I like this person, I admired him, so I didn't stop his advances because I didn't want to be disliked by this individual, which is just how... which, it's basically them just saying, yeah, I like this individual, so I let him do this. So how could you call this fucking rape? Right? I'm sorry for boiling it down, but that is essentially what this is. Buzzword. You're correct. Thank you, Nate, because I forgot that the word buzzword existed for this moment. But yes. This is her, just boiling it down very simply, right? Removing the fluff, removing the negative implications, removing, the bad faith, associations here. What this person is literally saying is, I liked him, I admired him, I had a connection to him, so I let him do what he wanted to do to me because I liked him and I didn't want him to hate me. And unfortunately, I feel like a lot of relationships are that way. Unfortunately, a lot of normal relationships work that way. To anybody who has had a fucking girlfriend in middle school, to anybody who has had a girlfriend in high school, to anybody who has had a girlfriend at a fucking workplace environment, right? You probably can relate to this, but you probably wouldn't call it rape, or a power dynamic, or abuse, or coercive. Over time, I grew increasingly distant and would eventually end contact completely. I don't feel safe enough to fully come forward because I don't want his fans and friends or even him to harass or contact me publicly. Okay, and here's where it gets saucy. Here's where it gets saucy when you tie everything together. When you tie everything together, which is what I was doing yesterday while researching and making this video, right? I wish to stay anonymous so I can avoid the anxiety and stress of being targeted by either himself, his friends. By either himself, his friends, and especially his fans. As SaberSpark has over 2 million subscribers, and even sharing my story at all has me feeling really afraid. I have seen other instances of SaberSpark using his enormous platform to confront people online he has had conflict with and hurt. I have also witnessed several instances of his friends attempting to justify him and his other actions. If this is true that him and his other friends try to justify him in this situation and his other actions, right, then there is probably something here that you are not disclosing that would lead people to believe that there was a form of consent or that there was a form of miscommunication that wouldn't make this rape. Okay? Who knows, though? Who knows? That is just conjecture. That is just conjecture. I am only assuming. But it gets better. It gets saucier. It gets saucier after this. I was not made aware of his jokes about consent and his recent behavior involving Chris until only recently, and it left this feels like to me is that this person heard about Chris and his interactions and the way that SaberSpark has interacted about situations like these and probably decided that in the past she was violated, right? I feel like that is the case. I feel like that is the case here. It makes the most sense to me. It makes the most sense to me. This person was communicated that Chris was being defended, or that this person, or no, not being defended, but was being somewhat supported by SaberSpark along with all of these details. And they were like, you know what? He does sound like a rapey individual. You know what? He does sound like an individual that potentially may have violated me in the past. Maybe these situations that I endured were probably rapey in nature because that was his intent, given his most recent behavior. The way that this is piled on, right, makes it feel as if there was an ulterior motivation to all of this, right? That's what it makes me feel like. I don't wish to publicly defend my personal experience and just wish to share my experience. End of testimony. Okay, now, a couple of things that I wanted to point out, which I'm pretty sure most of you have probably seen on Dicker's stream yesterday. But while I was researching, like, you know, this situation, while trying to compile any sort of evidence that I could find that would give credence to this potentially being a real story, right? I was like, well, I'm curious. Did SaberSpark even go to a pony convention? So that's the first thing I searched up. SaberSpark pony convention with this video that was archived. Brony Breakdown, Episode 5. Solrak/YapLab talks BronyCon 2012. SaberSpark and Paleo Steno MLP podcast, right? This is a podcast that SaberSpark used to run, and I was parsing through the video, checking for any mention of SaberSpark, right? Meeting up with a girl, or talking to a girl, or talking to a fan, or hugging a fan, anything. I came across this.
Apparently you can cut ice with my nipples. I don't know. Didn't realize.
I came across this, which made me not throw these allegations out as fake immediately, right? I came across that, and I realized that maybe there is a slim chance in hell where these allegations are real. So I don't think there's nothing here. I don't think that these allegations are 100% false. And I'm not saying that this person is the same victim at all. To be clear, I have to make it clear. I am not claiming that this person, right, in this image is the same person giving the testimony. I'm not saying that this pink-haired lady, right? I'm not saying that this pink-haired lady is I am not saying that this pink-haired lady is the victim, right? At all. I am not saying that. But I have seen additional images of her that were brought to me by one of my researchers, one of my agents, right? That did more digging after I found this. And I realized this person kind of fits the description. They seem pretty light. They seem pretty light. They probably might weigh 80 pounds. They kind of fit the description. I'm not saying this is the victim at all. And I don't think anybody should come to that conclusion either, to be very, very clear. But it is a funny coincidence, okay? It is an extremely funny coincidence that made me go like, okay, you know what? I'm going to give some benefit of the doubt and say that there is some truth to this story. Even if this isn't connected to that at all. I'm going to give some benefit of the doubt, okay? I'm not entirely discounting this story because I don't know. I do not know how true or how untrue it is, right? And again, to be clear, I don't know if this is the victim or not. I don't know if this is the victim or not. They might not be. They might not be, right? For all we know, she isn't. I gotta make that expressly clear. I don't want anybody to, like, look at this and be like, oh my god, right? I don't want anybody to like, think that this is actually anything connected to this situation. I don't want anyone to think that this person is actually connected to this, or that this person is actually the victim, okay? So I'm going to double, triple, quadruple down and say that there's no way to know that if this person is the victim, or if there even is a victim at all, to be clear. I am just saying that based on this alone, as I was researching, I have went from thinking that these allegations, right? Not because I think this is her, but I have went from thinking that these allegations are false, completely fabricated, to maybe they are real, because there is a possibility. There is a possibility, given the examples, because it just so happens that in this in the allegations that were levied, right? In the allegations that were levied over here, it just so happens that there was 2 instances of sexual assault, according to this girl, in 2013 and in 2012. And it just so happens to be that SaberSpark went to a pony convention in 2013 in Austin, Texas, and went to BronyCon 2012. Okay, that's all I have to say about that. So because of those details, which is a complete schizo theory on my part, by the way, because of those details, I'm willing to think that there is more here. Okay, I'm conspiracy theory time aside, I did want to cover a little bit of this video, right? And since I watched stickers already, I'm probably gonna be taking some of the insights he had on this section, as well as a little bit of my own insights that I had while I was editing my video. And I'm gonna skip right to the parts that I actually care to comment on. This video, all it does is literally just present the allegations. The same exact allegations we saw on Twitter. It offers no pushback, no plausible deniability, no digging, no evidence, nothing at all. There is nothing at all. Instead, what they do after the fact, after presenting the allegations, is that they go on to perpetuate these potentially false allegations, or these potentially heavily narrativized, sensationalized, right, allegations that might not have any basis, and talk about them as if they were real, which I find incredibly conflicting. It is incredibly reckless to do that. It is amateurish.
So welcome to the video where we break this down a little bit more and talk about what is consent, because yeah, it's an important discussion here. So because this is a really serious conversation and I know almost nothing about sexual assault, I invited Courtney. Again, she's all over this video to talk.
And keep in mind, if the allegations are true, that this information was being sat on for 6 months, if it is true that these allegations were sat on for 6 months, no additional information has come out, the story has now become a very large story, right? And still no information has come out. I think that this story is dead on arrival. I don't think anything will come from this after today. I do not believe that anything will come from this after today. No additional evidence, The story is now widely publicized. Multiple people are talking about this, right? Thousands of views. Hundreds of thousands of views, millions of views on Twitter, maybe even, like, if we look at the first thread, I don't know how many views that, Twitter thread has right now, but this much time has passed, and it's gotten this much attention, and we still don't have any evidence or additional information. I think the story is dead on arrival. I don't think anything else will come from this, unfortunately.
Assault. I invited Courtney. Again, she's all over this video to talk about, like, what is consent and when consent is there and when it's not there. We're having a great time here at the worst video ever, and just kind of break it down so we have a better understanding. And all you nerds out there, don't do something really, really bad like this. Don't do it, guys. Don't do it. Hi again.
Anyways, I don't really care to dwell too much on this person's idiotic takes about how implied consent doesn't exist, because that is something that she says. I point that out in my video that I published. But what she does do is that she ends up contradicting herself, saying that implied consent does exist by stating that, in a groupie situation, if a woman is flirting with you, flashing you her, boobs, and making out with you, that in that situation, that is completely different than what is going on in the SaberSpark situation. Okay? I do want to cover that, because this person is incredibly inconsistent, doesn't actually know what she's talking about, denies implied consent, and then contradicts herself by saying that implied consent does exist, only when she deems it correct, though. Only when she says that the situation is drastically different than to what's going on here. Right here.
Who's going to see the rock star perform and, like, flashing her titties while he's performing, and then going and flashing her titties to the bouncer to get backstage, and then flashing her titties in the rock star's face, probably making out with him a bit of her own volition, and one of them saying, hey, let's go back and sleep in the van. Like, there are multiple instances where consent is very, very clearly given by the groupie sleeping with the rock star, and, like, yeah, there may be a certain power dynamic, and, like, there absolutely is multiple instances of rock stars abusing that to be like, hey, well, I'm famous, show me your titties, but there's a big difference between going, hey, I'm famous, show me your titties, and someone going, I'm showing you my titties because I want to sleep with you. Right? Like, just the act of, like, basically showing you my titties is, in most circumstances, an invitation to touch my body, okay?
There you go. See, the contradiction. After bloviating, as Dickers puts it, about implied consent not existing, what is and isn't consent, as if she's somebody that can speak for 8 billion people in the world who have sex on a somewhat, daily or at least weekly basis, right? Okay, well, 8 billion is probably incorrect, given the fact that, that there's not 8 billion adults alive. But that's besides the point. You understand my point. Billions of people in the world, right? Generalizing like billions of people in the world who have sex on average, right? How are you going to say that implied consent doesn't exist and then contradict yourself and say that this is like, okay, because it's the woman that is like obviously inviting you to have sex? That is implied consent.
In no way is I'm a big fan of yours an invitation to touch somebody's body. And I also find it really, really weird that this dude meets a fan, gets the inkling she has a crush on him, so he invites her back to his hotel room. Okay, like, getting invited back to the hotel room has sexual connotations, and the fact that she didn't realize that just shows how naive she was, and the fact that none of that was communicated. Because clearly, he knew what he was inviting her back to the hotel room for.
We don't know that's the case. We don't know if that's the case. That is completely bad faith. That is incredibly bad faith. We do not know that's bad faith. I mean, we do not even know if that's the case. And if that is the case, right, this is a huge double standard. All of a sudden, a woman is capable of implying consent, but obviously a man, when they're inviting you back to their apartment, when they're flirting with you, when they're, like, communicating with you, this is an implied consent, right? We're just supposed to apply this, like, infantilization of this woman and say that she didn't have any, like, perception of what's going on here, and that he took advantage of that lack of perception. Come on, let's be real here. That's not rape. That is just a failure to communicate, which is substantially different than rape. People have conflated what rape means to such insane degrees in this modern era that you could call quite literally anybody a rapist by the standards that these people present in this video. It is completely unhinged. It is completely unhinged. Rape is such a serious crime, and these people are watering it down to such basic fucking principles, to such, like, to such broad nets that it would be impossible to properly identify anybody who was actually malicious in situations like these. When this could have just been two awkward people miscommunicating and not properly practicing sex in a way that would have been more feasible between both of them.
But she didn't. And that just gives me like the major ick, to be quite honest, because like
it's always people who draw acting like this. Very true.
Really as if Saber is acting like he's Gene Simmons inviting you back to, you know, the hotel room, when in reality he's a pudgy brony YouTuber showing you his animations before he shows you his dick. Like, that's not the same thing at all.
Okay, see, the double standards again. The double standards. This person does not even recognize their own double standards. They are accepting this story at face value with no pushback, no criticism, no further digging, no compilation of evidence. No evidence was shown at all. Not just that, but when questioning these people about evidence, from information that I've seen, these people got incredibly combative. So, but essentially, I'm not going to cover the miscellaneous stuff like all of the tweets and the community posts in this situation, right? I want to keep this segment relatively short, and I'll probably upload this in a VOD later today. But that's pretty much all I got for this story. I have given my recap and my speculations and my opinion on the situation. So that's it. That's the end of the segment for this. That's the end of the segment for this. That's the end of the segment for this. Unless somebody wants me to look at something else in relation to this. But for this specifically, I am done with it. I am done with the situation. I believe that this story is going to be dead on arrival.